This is a presentation over immigration during the Industrial Revolution. If you recall, yesterday we spoke about how the Industrial Revolution occurred mostly in the North. It began in Britain, then came to the United States, went to the North, and resulted in people moving from rural to urban areas in what's called urbanization. People began to mass produce things and move away from the home domestic system where goods were produced in the home and move towards the factory system where people produced goods on an assembly line or at least using industrial technology. The South, on the other hand, was still involved mostly in sharecropping, which is very similar to the system of slavery. People were working on the fields, endlessly paying off debt to the point where they couldn't leave. There's going to be large numbers of immigrants moving to the North during the Industrial Revolution, which is what we're going to talk about today. From 1870 to 1900, we have the largest mass movement in history of people. It happens between Europe and the United States. This is literally the most people that ever moved from one point to another point, ever, and it still is that point today. So 1870 to 1900. One of the reasons behind this is that they came on steam-powered ships. If you remember, steam power was invented during the Industrial Revolution. This means that the invention of steam power led to more people being able to safely and quickly get across the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean and immigrate. 25% of the population in 1900 were foreign born. 25% of the entire United States population in 1900 were not born in the United States. So where did they come from? Well, in the West, you have Angel Island, which is where people immigrating from Asia came from, mostly Japan and China. From the East, you had people from Western Europe, Southern Europe, and Eastern Europe immigrating through Ellis Island. These were your two major checkpoints where people would go through. Names would be changed because the Americans didn't know how to pronounce the names or spell the names. They just kind of shuffle them on through because a lot of times they wouldn't speak English. A lot of difficulties with that. Like my last name, I was going to be a McKnight, but they couldn't spell it, so I'm McNutt. Got the short end of the stick there, but that's all right. So they either come from the West or from the East. So why were the immigrants coming? Major reason is jobs. More so than anything else. The United States has so many jobs because all of these industries are popping up. Europe had their Industrial Revolution about 50 years before it comes to the United States, and now more people want to come to the United States. There's more jobs here. There's also more opportunities for freedom. People saw, all those great ideas of freedom in America and bald eagles and all that great stuff. They wanted to come to the United States and see what was going on. They wanted freedom of religion and freedom of the press and freedom of assembly and all that Bill of Rights, right to bear arms, whatever you want. They also wanted to escape problems at home. This is the same as that time period that the potato famine's happening in Ireland, where Ireland was literally going through periods of starvation. They were immigrating over the United States. Italy was having issues with their government and how it was being run. They were poor. They wanted to escape that and come to America. A plethora of different countries in Europe were having different problems, all for different reasons. The United States seemed like the beacon on the hill, as it was called, the place where you would come and fix all of your problems. Now, many problems come with immigration. There was a lack of safe, well-paying jobs. Just because you came to America did not mean that you were going to be placed as like a businessman. Typically, you were going to be working in a meat packing plant or another kind of plant, and there's not very many regulations on how these plants are run. In fact, there are no universal regulations, at least from the government. Immigrants also did not speak English. Almost all immigrants still spoke their native language. And cities became more and more overcrowded. People, as a result of not being able to speak English, as well as this overcrowding issue, would settle into small subsects inside of cities. This is where you get Little Italy and Chinatown and all of your other different neighborhood sections. That comes out of the Industrial Revolution when people all moved here. You also have problems with political corruption. If you remember Boss Tweed we spoke about, he basically recruits a bunch of Irish immigrants using these guys that would go out to the boats when the Irish immigrants came in and said, hey, you want to come get a job? And they would speak to them in Irish. And they would go work for him in basically a mob-style operation. In order to try to solve these problems, you had settlement houses, which were built by Jane Addams and a few other reformers. Settlement houses taught immigrants how to speak English and tried to assimilate them more into American culture, which I'll talk about here in a second. So two different major ideas prop up amongst people that don't really like these new immigrants coming in. The first one is nativism. Nativism is the idea that you do not want any new immigrants coming into the United States. Hence the word native. Nativism, someone natively born in the United States. These people thought that all the foreign immigrants were coming in and stealing all of their jobs. They thought that they were going to cause all these different problems because they're bringing all of the issues, at least they felt, like these issues of war and of famine and all these problems over to the United States. You can see on the left-hand side the racism against Japanese in this example. There was extreme racism towards Japan and China to the point where you actually close off immigration with them about 50 years in the future from the Industrial Revolution. On the right, you see that no Irish are able to apply at this place in 1916. It isn't until the 1920s and 1930s that Irish and Italian Americans are classified as actually being white. They were considered non-white because there was so much hatred towards the violent stereotype that Irish and Italian immigrants portrayed. The other idea was assimilation. Assimilation is where, yes, immigrants can come to the United States, but they have to be almost forcibly integrated into our culture. On the left there, you kind of see the idea of the American melting pot, people from a bunch of different stereotypical personalities transformed into your perfect Americans, which are all white and have awesome looking flags. On the right, you see this picture of Uncle Sam, America, teaching all of these illiterate, non-white children that kind of look almost demonic and transforming them into perfect white textbook reading, mostly white, there's one African American there, citizens that are the perfect student, which is what Americans want to be. This is where you get the whole idea behind U.S. history actually being taught in schools, relates back to assimilation. They actually would take Native Americans and force them to speak English and force them to learn American culture so that everyone would have a common culture to fall back on. In today's activity, you're going to be creating political cartoons and looking at political cartoons because political cartoons are almost the entire basis behind understanding different politics throughout American history since they started being created back in the 1800s, at least in major use. The two major concepts of political cartoons are symbolism, as in representing something as something else, and I'll show you an example here in a second, and highlighting issues from the period. Political cartoons are always politically charged. There's always someone trying to say something about what they don't like in government or things they're observing, arguments they're seeing in government. You don't see a political cartoon just saying, day's going great. There's always something politically charged about it. So here's one example. This is from the period that we're talking about. You can see that Uncle Sam is behind this nice looking gate. It says United States of America, walk on in, walk in, welcome. And he kind of has a stern look about him. And he's looking at what's supposed to be an immigrant. And he has disease. He's talking about desecrating the Sabbath on his back, anarchy with a bomb. He has poverty carrying around. So he has all of this literal baggage, symbolism, baggage. And Uncle Sam's symbolism is that he's kind of denying someone from money. He doesn't look very happy. The same exact idea with on the gate, there's a dollar sign above the United States of America, meaning that we have money. You can kind of get out of this that it's kind of showing that America is not as free as what we would like it to be, as what we portray it as. There's actually a lot of barriers to get inside the United States. We don't necessarily want people that have all of this baggage coming in, or at least we didn't practice allowing these kind of people in. Here's a more modern day example of political cartoon. This is from 2012. On the left, you see the two Americans have their Save the Earth sign. They say, we're doomed because all of these other people, which seems like the majority of Americans, are more concerned with saving the Twinkie. As you remember, back in 2012, the Twinkie was actually discontinued. I believe they make them again. But the concept is that people were more concerned about their fast food, their fat foods, I guess, rather than actually saving the planet. Politically charged. So you can get out of this that political cartoons always are going to represent something else than what might be shown at face value. You're going to look at a bunch of different political cartoons, see whether or not they talk about nativism, or assimilation, and then you're going to create your own political cartoon, something that represents one of these two ideas. You're going to make that political cartoon based off of this era, based off of 1870 to 1900, the Industrial Revolution, this immigration wave. And then tomorrow and next week, we'll talk about capitalism and the different money-making tactics and the opposition to those money-making tactics with labor unions.